Blech. I don't know how loud this is. Give me 1 second. Is it quiet ambience? Is it loud ambience? I didn't test my ambience beforehand. I don't think this is the right one. Maybe it is, and it's just really quiet. Let me just go to where it peaks. It's very quiet, but that's okay. It should be fine. All right. Welcome. What? Where am I? Welcome. I've got my reading glasses on. I don't know if it's better. Maybe I won't wear my reading glasses. I don't know. I can't decide. My brain is full. But welcome in. We're going to be reading Charlotte's Web. It's my D&D character's favorite book. Because it's the only one I could remember when I was asked what her favorite book was. So we're gonna read it. I got an online copy. I'm not very good at reading books on screens, so if I stumble over words, I do apologize for that. Mistakes. I'm reading glasses are a must, but the glasses look so funky. I don't know. I don't think the glasses suit me that well. I'll keep them on. I'll look like a nerd. I'll look like a nerd reading a child's book, I suppose. I suppose I'll just look like a nerd. And thank you for the resub as well. I don't know if I said that already. My brain broken. My brain's on 5 frames per second right now. But how these streams work, I'm just going to be reading. Whenever I take a break for either like a drink or just to get a chapter break, do something I want to talk about, I'll pause and talk about it. Otherwise, just chat between yourselves. I'll be around at the chapter breaks whenever I stop reading. I don't think we're going to finish it today. I don't know. I don't know how long this is. It said like 3 hours reading. I don't know if that's at a child's pace though, or at like big boy pace. So we'll figure it out. If you're wanting to read along, I put the link to it in the pinned comment. There are some pictures. I looked, and there's pictures in here. It's not all words. So, I mean, if you look through, you can see pictures at least. Why am I being called a geek? What the heck? What the heck? I also don't know if I should keep the ads up. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll turn off ads. We don't need ads for a reading stream. Maybe we do. I don't know. Where are the ads? There we go. I'll turn those off. Maybe I'll scooch over a bit so I'm not like awkward. That should be fine. That should be fine. Panics and dyslexia. Listen, I'll be stumbling over words. Don't you worry about it. That's a guarantee. I didn't do my tongue twisters beforehand. Usually when I do reading streams, I do tongue twisters beforehand to lower the chances of mistakes. I didn't do that, so extra nervous. I'm gonna mute, cough, and then I'm gonna start. I'm a bit sick, so I might have to mute and cough a few times. Might be like, why are you doing a reading stream when you're sick? I don't know. But this is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, with pictures by Garth Williams. You can't see it on stream? That's your fault. This is chapter 1, Before Breakfast. Where's Papa going with the axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the hog house, replied Miss Arble. Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a runt, very small and weak, and will never amount to anything, so your father has decided to do away with it. Do away with it? Shrieked Fern. You mean kill it, just because it's smaller than the others? Miss Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, she said. Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyways. Fern pushed the chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arble stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you'll have to learn to control yourself. Control myself, yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself? Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house, and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby, and see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled like coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink, washed his hands, and dried them on a roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. Inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arable. "Saved us from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First, she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother, then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He had heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, and a wooden dagger in the other. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" She's got a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arable. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat." "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said his mother. "The school bus will be along in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" asked Avery. "No, I only distribute pigs to early risers," said Mr. Arable. "Fern was up at daylight trying to get rid of the injustice in the world. As a result, she's now got a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows what can happen when a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat." But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured the warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. "Give him breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, with her infant between her knees, teaching it how to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked on the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig away from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out onto the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached the school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. Chapter end. Taking a drink. These are short chapters. I'm used to reading big boy books, so I don't know what to do here. All right, chapter 2, Wilbur. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied on his bib, and held a bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time and again just before going to bed. Mrs. Arable gave him a feeding around noontime each day when Fern was away in school. Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up the bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. Then, when Mrs. Arable complained, he moved to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Arable fixed a small yard specifically for Wilbur under the apple tree, and gave him a large wooden box filled with straw and a doorway cut out in it, so he could walk in and out as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No," said her father. "You watch and see what he does." Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree outside. Wilbur ran to her and she held the bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and sleepily walked into the box. Fern peered for the door. Wilbur was poking the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her till the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around a turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up inside his yard. But as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out and he would follow her around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom of the steps until she came down again. If she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes, on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put him in the carriage alongside the doll. He liked this. And if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed because his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly so as not to wake her infants. One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the brook, Wilbur waded in after her. He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook where it was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers called a spring pig, which simply means he was born in the springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arble said he was now big enough to sell and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased, and he was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arble was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said. "You've had your fun raising a baby pig, but Wilbur's not a baby anymore, and he's got to be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," suggested Mr. Arble to Fern. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes to live there, you can walk down the road and visit him as much as you like." "How much money should I ask for him?" Fern wanted to know. "Well," said her father, "he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig to sell for $6, and see what he says." As it was soon arranged, Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer. And Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and went to live in a manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. End of chapter. Oh, Mantis, you still have the book in a box alongside of your other kids' box? I never read this as a kid. I think it was like because the animated movie had come out. I don't think I watched the live action movie, but I watched the animated one and I really enjoyed it. But for some reason, never thought to pick up the book for it. I was just like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's a good movie. I really enjoyed it. It stuck in my head long enough to be like, oh yeah, this is my favorite book in D&D. So I'm kind of remembering what happened. Because I thought they kept it on their barn. I didn't know they sold the pig. I didn't remember that. But this is Chapter 3, Escape. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay and smelled of manure. It smelled of the perspiration of tired horses and the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had a sort of peaceful smell, as though nothing bad could ever happen again in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing and of axle grease and of rubber boots and of new rope. And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish. But it mostly smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead, and there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in winter when the animals spent most of their time indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in summer when the big doors stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for the cows, and sheepfold down below for the sheep. And a pig pen down below for Wilbur, and it was full of all sorts of things that you'd find in barns. Ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, scythes, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows like to build their nests in. It was the kind of barn that children like to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile was a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded, and she placed the stool in the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese who lived with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to go into the pig pen. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting there right outside his pen. But he never had any fun. No walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered out into a small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. "There's never anything to do around here," he thought. He walked slowly to his food trough and sniffed to see if anything had been overlooked at lunch. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed on top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still and tired of lying down. "I'm less than 2 months old and I'm tired of living," he said. He walked out to the yard again. "When I'm out here," he said, "there's no place to go but in. And when I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out in the yard." "That's where you're wrong, my friend," said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw the goose standing there. "You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard," said the goose, who talked rather fast. "One of the boards is loose. Push on it, push on it, push on it, and come on out." "What?" said Wilbur. "Say it slower." At the risk of repeating myself," said the goose, "I suggest that you come on out. It's wonderful out here." "Did you say that a board was loose?" That I did," said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence and saw that the goose was right. One board was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed. The board gave way. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. How does it feel to be free?" she asked. "I like it," said Wilbur. "That is, I guess I like it." Actually, Wilbur felt queer to be outside his fence, with nothing between him and the big world. "Where do you think I better go?" Anywhere you like," said the goose. "Go down to the orchard, root up the sod, go down to the garden, dig up the radishes, root everything up, eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over, skip and dance and jump and prance. Go down the orchard and stroll through the woods. The world's a wonderful place when you're young." "Well, I can see that," replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, looked all around, sniffed the smells of the afternoon, and then set off walking down through the orchard. Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone had noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from out the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. "Homer," she cried, "pigs out! Levy, pigs out! Homer, Levy, pigs out! He's down there under the apple tree." Now the trouble starts, thought Wilbur. Now I'll catch it. The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering, "Run, run, run, downhill, make way for the woods, the woods!" She shouted to Wilbur. "They'll never, 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 never catch you in the woods." The Cocker Spaniel heard the commotion as he ran out from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out of the machine shed where he was mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked towards Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyways, he had never been down there in the woods, and he wasn't sure he would like it. "Get behind him, Lurvy." I don't think that was his voice. "Get behind him, Lurvy," said Mr. Zuckerman, "and drive him towards the barn. And take it easy, don't rush him. I'll go get the bucket of slops." The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. Whenever any creature broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses in their stalls in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering, and soon the horses had caught on to what was happening. "Wilbur's out," they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and became excited to know that one of his friends had gotten free and was no longer penned up or tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what to do, which way to run. It seemed as though everyone was after him. "This is what it's like to be free," he thought. "I believe I'd rather be penned up in my own yard." The Cocker Spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other. Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started for the garden. And now Mr. Zuckerman was coming down towards him carrying a pail. "This is really awful," thought Wilbur. "Why doesn't Fern come?" He began to cry. The goose took command and began to give orders. "Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about, dodge about," cried the goose. "Skip around, run towards me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make it for the woods, twist and turn." The Cocker Spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran away. Lurvy reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs. Lurvy missed Wilbur and grabbed the spaniel instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. "Try it again, try it again." "Run downhill," suggested the cows. "Run towards me," yelled the gander. "Run uphill," cried the sheep. "Twist and twist," honked the goose. "Jump and dance," said the rooster. "Look out for Lurvy," called the cows. "Look out for Zuckerman," yelled the gander. "Watch out for the dog," cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by this hullabaloo. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time, and couldn't twirl and twist when he was jumping and dancing. And he was crying so hard he could barely see what was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig. Not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern was there to take him into her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, and a popover left from Zuckerman's breakfast. "Come, pig," Mr. Zuckerman said, tapping the pail. "Come, pig." Wilbur took a step towards the pail. No, said the goose. "The old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach." Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step towards the pail. Pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly towards the barnyard, looking about him innocently, as if he didn't know what a little white pig was following along behind him. "You'll be sorry, called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking towards the pail of slops. "You'll miss your freedom," honked the goose. "An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops." Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops through the trough. He then pulled the loose board away from the fence, so there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. "Reconsider, reconsider!" cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He slipped through the fence into the yard. He walked through the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the pop over. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. "He's quite a pig," said Lurvy. "Yep, he'll make a good pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warm milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. "Well, I'm really too young to go out into the world alone," he thought as he lay down. Oh god, the next chapter is called Loneliness. Okay, let me take another drink. Goose trying to start some Oh my goodness. And hello, Saran. Welcome in. I hope you're having a good night. We're taking a chill read. I have so many messages. Okay. All right. One more drink, and then we're going to start chapter 4, Loneliness. The next day was rainy and dark. Rain fell on the roof of the barn and dripped steadily from the eaves. Rain fell into the barnyard and ran in crooked courses down into the lane where thistles and pigweed grew. Rain spattered against Mr. Zuckerman's kitchen windows and came gushing out of the downspouts. Rain fell onto the backs of sheep as they grazed in the meadow. When the sheep tired of standing in the rain, they walked slowly up the lane and into the fold. Rain upset Wilbur's plans. Wilbur had planned to go out this day and dig a new hole in his yard. He had other plans too. His plans for the day went something like this. Breakfast at 6:30, skim milk, crusts, middling, bits of donut, wheat cakes with a drop of maple syrup sticking to them, potato skins, leftover custard pudding with raisin, and bits of shredded wheat. Breakfast would be finished at 7. From 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Templeton, the rat who lived under his trough. Talking to Templeton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than doing nothing. From 8 to 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap outdoors in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig a hole, or trench, and possibly find something good to eat buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, he planned to stand still and watch flies on the board, watch bees in the clover, and watch swallows in the air. 12 o'clock, lunchtime. Middlings, warm water, apple parings, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scraps, stale hominy, and wrappers of a package of cheese. Lunch would be over at 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. And from 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places by rubbing against the fence. From 3 to 4, he planned to stand perfectly still and think about what it was like to be alive, and to wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper: skim milk, provender leftover sandwich from Lurvy's lunchbox, prune skins, a morsel of this, a bit of that, fried potatoes, marmalade drippings, a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, a piece of baked apple, a scrap of upside-down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans. He woke up at 6 and saw the rain, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. "I get everything all beautifully planned out and it has to go and rain," he said. For a while he stood gloomily indoors. Then he walked to the door and looked out. Drops of rain struck his fence. His yard was cold and wet. His trough had an inch of rainwater in it. Templeton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Templeton?" called Wilbur. There was no answer. Suddenly, Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. One day just like another, he groaned. I'm very young. I have no real friend here in the barn. It's gonna rain all morning and afternoon, and Vern won't come in such bad weather. Oh, honestly. And Wilbur was crying again, for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard the banging of a pail. Lurvy was standing outside in the rain stirring up breakfast. Come on, pig, said Lurvy. Wilbur did not budge. Lurvy dumped the slops, scrapped the pail, and walked away. He noticed that something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. He mentioned this to the goose who was sitting quietly in the corner of the sheepfold. Will you come over and play with me? He asked. Sorry, Sonny, sorry, said the goose. I'm sitting on my eggs, 8 of them. Gotta keep them toasty warm. I have to stay right here, and no flibbity-ibbity-gibbit. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings. Well, I don't think you were expecting woodpeckers, said Wilbur bitterly. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. Will you play with me? He asked. Certainly not, said the lamb. In the first place, I can't get into your pen. I'm not old enough to jump the fence. And in the second place, I'm not interested in pigs. Pigs mean less than nothing to me. What do you mean, less than nothing? Replied Wilbur. I don't think there's any such thing as less than nothing. Nothing's the absolute limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can there be something less than nothing? And if there were something that was less than nothing, then nothing would be less than nothing. It will be something. Even though there's just a very little bit of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that is less than it is. Oh, be quiet, said the lamb. Go play by yourself. I don't want to play with pigs. Sadly, Wilbur laid down and listened to the rain. Soon, he saw the rat climbing down a slanted board that was used as a stairway. Will you play with me, Templeton? Asked Wilbur. Play? Play? Said Templeton, turning his whiskers. Play? I hardly know the meaning of the word. Well, said Wilbur, it means to have fun, to frolic, to run, to skip and make merry. I never do those things if I can avoid them, replied the rat sourly. I prefer to spend my time eating, gnawing, spying and hiding. I'm a glutton, but not a merrymaker. Right now, I'm on my way to your trough so I can eat breakfast, since you haven't gotten enough sense to eat it yourself. And Templeton, the rat, crept stealthily along the wall and disappeared into a private tunnel that he had dug between the door and the trough in Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had pretty much things his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skills and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place under the pig trough without coming out into the open. He had tunnels and runways all over Mr. Zuckerman's farm and could get from one place to another without being seen. Usually he slept during the daytime and was abroad only after dark. Wilbur watched him disappear into his tunnel. In a moment, he saw the rat's sharp nose poke out from underneath the wooden trough. Cautiously, Templeton pulled himself over the edge of the trough. This was almost more than Wilbur could stand, on this dreary rainy day, to see his breakfast being eaten by somebody else. He knew Templeton was getting soaked out there in the pouring rain, but even that didn't comfort him. Friendless, dejected, and hungry, he threw himself down in the manure and sobbed. Late that afternoon, Lurvy went to Mr. Zuckerman. I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hasn't touched his food. Give him 2 more spoonsful of sulphur and a little molasses, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him when Lurvy caught him and forced the medicine down his throat. This was certainly the worst day of his life. He didn't know whether he could endure the awful loneliness any more. Darkness settled over everything. Soon there were only shadows and noises of the sheep chewing their cuds, and occasionally the rattle of a cow chain up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when, out of the darkness, came a small voice he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin, but pleasant. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur?" it said. "I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day, and I like you." "But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping to his feet. "Where are you, and who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Go to sleep, you'll see me in the morning." And that was chapter 4. This is very sad. We're only 5 chapters in, so it's in like 38 pages, so it will get happier. It's really sad so far. I didn't remember it being so sad. And now I'm sat here, like, I've made this my D&D character's favorite book. And honestly, knowing Dawn, yeah, no, this fits her. Like, I kind of said it on a whim because I was put on the spot for, like, what's your favorite book? I somehow picked a really good one for her, I think. Considering Dawn's character, I think I picked a really good one. Even if it was off the top of my head. I instinctively knew. And I might be BSing a little bit here. Okay. I'll take another drink and continue reading. The night seemed long. Wilbur's stomach was empty and his mind was full. And when your stomach's empty and your mind is full, it's always hard to sleep. A dozen times during the night, Wilbur woke and stared into the blackness, listening to the sounds and trying to figure out what time it was. A barn is never perfectly quiet. Even at midnight, there's usually something stirring. The first time he woke, he heard Templeton gnawing a hole in the grain bin. Templeton's teeth scraped loudly against the wood and made quite a racket. "That crazy rat," thought Wilbur. "Why does he have to stay up all night, grinding his clashes and destroying people's property? Why can't he go to sleep like any decent animal?" The second time Wilbur woke, he heard the goose turning on her nest, chuckling to herself. "What time is it?" whispered Wilbur to the goose. "Probably. It's 11:30, said the goose. "Why aren't you asleep, Wilbur?" "Too many things on my mind," said Wilbur. "Well," said the goose, "that's not my trouble. I have nothing at all on my mind, and I've got too many things under my behind. Haven't you ever tried to sleep while sitting on eggs?" "No," replied Wilbur. "I suppose it is uncomfortable. How long does it take a goose egg to hatch?" Approximately 30 days, or so I'm told," answered the goose. "But I cheat a little. On warm afternoons, I put a little straw over the eggs and go out for a walk." Wilbur yawned and went back to sleep. In his dreams, he heard the voice saying, "I'll be a friend to you. Go to sleep and you'll see me in the morning." About half an hour before dawn, Wilbur woke and listened. The barn was still dark. A sheep lay motionless. Even the goose was quiet. Overhead, on the main floor, nothing stirred. The cows were resting. The horses dozed. Templeton had quit work and gone off somewhere else on an errand. The only sound was the slight scraping noise from the rooftop, where the weather vanes swung back and forth. Wilbur loved the barn when it was like this, calm and quiet, waiting for light. "Day is almost here," he thought. Through a small window, a faint gleam appeared. One by one, stars went out. Wilbur could see the goose a few feet away. She sat with her head tucked under a wing. Then he could see sheep and the lambs. The sky lightened. "Oh, beautiful day, it's here at last. Today I shall find my friend." Wilbur looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window ledge and stared up at the ceiling. But he saw nothing new. Finally, he decided he would have to speak up. He hated to break the lovely stillness of dawn by using his voice, but he couldn't think of any other way to locate this mysterious new friend who was nowhere to be seen. so Wilbur cleared his throat. "Attention, please," he said in a loud, firm voice. "Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly make himself or herself known by giving an appropriate sign or signal?" Wilbur paused and listened. All the other animals lifted their heads and stared at him. Wilbur blushed, but he was determined to get in touch with his new unknown friend. "Attention, please," he said. "I repeat this message. Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly speak up? Please tell me where you are, if you are my friend." The sheep looked at each other in disgust. "Stop your nonsense, Wilbur," said the oldest sheep. "If your new friend is here, you probably disturbing his rest. The quickest way to spoil a friendship is to wake someone up in the morning before he is ready. How can you be sure your friend is an early riser?" I don't know what sheep voice to do. "I beg everyone's pardon," whispered Wilbur. "I didn't mean to be objectionable." He lay down meekly in the manure, facing the door. He did not know it, but his friend was very near, and the old sheep was right. The friend was still asleep. Soon, Lurvy appeared with slops for breakfast. Wilbur rushed out, ate everything in a hurry, and licked the trough. The sheep moved down off their lane. The gander waddled behind them, pulling grass. And then, just as Wilbur was settling down for his morning nap, he heard it again, the thin voice that addressed him the night before. "Salutations," said the voice. Wilbur jumped to his feet. What?" he cried. "Salutations," repeated the voice. "What are they, and where are you?" screamed Wilbur. "But please tell me where you are, and what are salutations?" "Salutations are greetings," said the voice. "When I say salutations, it's just my fancy way of saying hello or good morning. Actually, it's a silly expression, and I'm surprised that I used it at all. As to my whereabouts, that's easy. Look up here in the corner of the doorway. Here I am, look, I'm waving." At last, Wilbur saw the creature that had spoken to him in such a kindly way. Stretched across the upper part of the doorway was a big spider web, and hanging from the top of the web, head down, was a large grey spider. She was about the size of a gumdrop. She had 8 legs, and she was waving one of them at Wilbur in a friendly greeting. "See me now?" she asked. "Oh, yeah, indeed," said Wilbur. "Yes, indeed. How are you? Good morning, salutations. I'm pleased to meet you. What's your name, please? May I have your name?" "My name," said the spider, "is Charlotte." "Charlotte what?" asked Wilbur eagerly. "Charlotte A. Cavatica, but you can just call me Charlotte." "Well, I think you're beautiful," said Wilbur. "Well, I am pretty," replied Charlotte. "There's no denying that. Almost all spiders are rather nice looking. I am not as flashy as some, but I'll do. I wish I could see you, Wilbur, as clearly as you can see me." "Why can't you?" asked the pig. "I'm right here." "Yes, but I'm nearsighted," replied Charlotte. "I've always been dreadfully nearsighted. It's good in some ways, not so good in others. Watch me wrap up this fly." A fly that had been crawling along Wilbur's trough had flown up and blundered into the lower part of Charlotte's web and was tangled in the sticky threads. The fly was beating its wings furiously, trying to break loose and free itself. "First," said Charlotte, "I dive at him." She plunged headfirst towards the fly. As she dropped, a tiny silken thread unwound from her rear end. "Next, I wrap him up." She grabbed the fly, threw a few jets of silk around it, and rolled it over and over, wrapping it so it couldn't move. Wilbur watched in horror. He could hardly believe what he was seeing, and although he detested flies, he was sorry for this one. "There," said Charlotte. "Now I knock him out so he'll be more comfortable." She bit the fly. "He can't feel a thing now," she remarked. "He'll make a perfect breakfast for me." "You mean you eat flies?" gasped Wilbur. "Certainly. Flies, bugs, grasshoppers, choice beetles, moths, butterflies, tasty cockroaches, gnats, midges, daddy longlegs, centipedes, mosquitoes, crickets, anything that is careless enough to get caught in my web. I have to live, don't I? Why, yeah, of course, said Wilbur. Do they taste good? Delicious. Of course, I don't really eat them. I drink them. Drink their blood. I love blood, said Charlotte, and her pleasant, thin voice grew thinner and more pleasant. Don't say that, groaned Wilbur. Please don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. And I have to say what is true. I'm not entirely happy about my diet of flies and bugs, but it's the way I'm made. A spider has to pick up a living somehow or another, and I happen to be a trapper. I naturally built a web and trapped flies and other insects. My mother was a trapper before me. Her mother was a trapper before her. All of our families have been trappers. Way back for thousands and thousands of years, we spiders have been laying for flies and bugs. That's a miserable inheritance, said Wilbur gloomily. He was sad because his new friend was so bloodthirsty. This is Dawn and Adrian. Yes, it is, agreed Charlotte. But I can't help it. I don't know how the first spider in the early days of the world happened to think up this fancy idea of spinning a web, but she did. And it was clever of her, too. And since then, all of us spiders have had to work the same trick. It's not a bad pitch on the whole. It's cruel, replied Wilbur, who did not intend to be argued out of his position. Well, you can't talk, said Charlotte. You have your meals brought to you in a pail. Nobody feeds me. I have to get my own living. I live by my wits. And I have to be sharp and clever, lest I go hungry. I have to think things out, catch what I can, take what comes. And it just so happens, my friend, that what comes in flies and insects and bugs. And furthermore, said Charlotte, shaking one of her legs, do you realize that if I don't catch bugs and eat them, bugs would increase and multiply and get so numerous that they'd destroy the earth and wipe out everything? Really, said Wilbur. I wouldn't want that to happen. Perhaps your web's a good thing after all. The goose had been listening to this conversation, chuckling to herself. There are a lot of things Wilbur doesn't know about life, she thought. He's really a very innocent pig. He doesn't even know what's going to happen to him around Christmas time. He has no idea that Mr. Zuckerman and Lurvy are plotting to kill him. And the goose raised herself up a bit and poked her eggs a little further until they would receive full heat from the warm body and soft feathers. Charlotte stood quietly over the fly, preparing to eat it. Wilbur laid down and closed his eyes. He was tired from this wakeful night and from the excitement of meeting someone for the first time. A breeze brought him the smell of clover, the sweet-smelling world beyond his fence. Well, he thought, I got a new friend all right, but what a gamble friendship is. Charlotte is fierce, brutal, scheming, bloodthirsty, everything I don't like. How can I learn to like her, even though she's pretty and, of course, clever? Wilbur was merely suffering the doubts and fears that would go along with finding his new friend. In good time, he was to discover what he was mistaken about Charlotte. Underneath her rather bold and cruel exterior, she has a kind heart, and she was loyal to prove it. And she was to prove loyal and true to the very end. Yeah, I don't remember being that dark too. Hi, Becker. And thank you so much, Burger, for the resub. 29 months. Holy moly. That's a lot of months. Reading this, I'm reading this with the perspective of baby Dawn reading this, and also Dawn giving this to Adrian to read while he went on his mission. And I'm like, oh my god, I head in hands. Can we do Animal Farm next? Maybe. I was gonna do more like children's stuff, but maybe I'll think about it. I'm thinking about like the bloodthirsty and like this is Dawn meeting Adrian and finding out he's a vampire. I've got a new friend, but what a gamble it is. Adrian's fierce, brutal, scheming, and bloodthirsty. Everything I don't like. I gotta send this to Tisha. I gotta just snip this line. Animal Farm's for children because it's got animals in it. Okay. I'm not quite sure that's how it works. And hi, Monster the Biz. Welcome in. We're about to start chapter 6. I just need to I need to send a screenshot to someone really quick because I have brain rot. Reading Charlotte's Web. Remembering Dawn said it was her favorite book. Plus Kate Adrian to read. Oh my god. What is this? It's them. Sorry, I have to say my message out loud. Oh wait. Chat says hi because I am reading that. I'm saying what I'm typing out loud. Oh, oops. Okay, there we are. I think teacher might be streaming tonight. I don't know. Okay. But we're about to start chapter 6. I'm just going to take a sip and a drink. If you're wanting to read along, there are a couple pictures that pop up. I put the link at the pinned in chat. And we're going to be starting chapter 6. Tisha says hi. Okay, Tisha says hi, and I'm going to try start chapter 6, Summer Days. The early summer days on the farm are the happiest and fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet, and then fade. Apple blossoms come with the lilacs, and the bees visit around the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends and children have time to play and fish for trouts in the brook. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the 1st of July, the work horses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning you could hear the rattle of the machine as it went round and round, while tall grass fell down behind the cutter in long green swatches. Sorry, I have hiccups. Next day, if there was no thunder showers, all hands would help rake, pitch, and load, and the hay would be hauled to the barn in the high hay wagon, with Fern and Avery riding at the top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft until the whole barn seemed like a wonderful bed of timothy and clover. It was fine to jump in, and perfect to hide in. Sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay and would add it to the other things in his pocket. Early summer days were a jubilee time for birds. In the fields, around the house, in the barn, in the woods, in the swamp, everywhere love and songs and nests and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston, calls, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody," on an apple burrow, and Phoebe Teeters wags its tail and says, "Phoebe, Phoebe." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely light it is, says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude." If you enter the barn, the swallows swoop down from their nests and scold, "Cheeky, cheeky," they say. In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat and drink and chew and suck. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar. The Frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. Everywhere you look is life. Even the little ball of spit on the weed stalk, if you poke it apart, has a warm green worm inside of it. And on the underside of the leaf is a potato of the potato vine, a bright orange eggs of the potato bug. It was on a day in early summer that the goose eggs hatched. It was an important event in the barn cellar. Fern was there, sitting on her stool when it happened. Except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that the goslings had at last arrived. The goose knew a day in advance that they were coming. She could hear their weak voices calling from inside the egg. She knew that they were in a desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break out and get out. so she sat quite still and talked less than usual. When the first gosling poked its green-gray head out through the goose's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made the announcement. "I'm sure," she said, "every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitted effort and patience on the part of our friend the goose, she has now got something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincerest congratulations?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing shamelessly. "Thank you," said the gander. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings are there? I can only see one." "There are 7, said the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte. 7 is a lucky number. "Luck has nothing to do with it," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." At this point, Templeton showed his nose from his hiding place under Wilbur's trough. He glanced at Fern, then crept cautiously towards the goose, keeping very close to the wall. Everyone watched him, for he was not well liked nor trusted. "Look," he began in his sharp voice, "you say ya got 7 goslings. There were 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch?" "It's a dud, I guess," said the goose. "What are you gonna do with it?" continued Templeton, his little round beady eyes fixed on the goose. "You can have it," replied the goose. "Roll it away and add it to that nasty collection of yours." Templeton had a habit of picking up unusual objects from around the farm and storing them in his home. He saved everything. "Certainly, certainly," said the gander. "You may have the egg, but I'll tell you one thing, Templeton. If I ever catch you poking your ugly little nose around our goslings, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever took." And the gander opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was strong and brave, but truth is, both the goose and the gander were worried about Templeton, and with good reason. The rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rodent kindness, no compunctions, no higher feeling, no friendliness, no anything. He would kill a gosling if he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everyone knew that. With her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched egg out of the nest, and the entire company watched in disgust while a rat rolled it away. Even Wilbur, who could eat almost anything, was appalled. "Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg," he muttered. "A rat is a rat," said Charlotte. She laughed, a tinkling little laugh. "But my friend, if that ancient egg ever breaks, the bond will be untenable." "What does that mean?" asked Wilbur. "It means no one will ever be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotting egg is a regular stink bomb." "Hey, I won't break it," snarled Templeton. "I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time." He disappeared into his tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged until he succeeded in rolling it to his lair under the trough. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, a grey goose led his 7 goslings off the nest and out into the world. Mr. Zuckerman spied them when he came in with Wilbur's supper. "Well, hello there," he said, smiling all over. "Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now, isn't that lovely?" Chapter end. And thank you so much for the follow and welcome in, Sword. Here for the story. I hope you enjoy it. A little bit, it might be coming in a bit late, but I'm sure we haven't gotten to the exciting part yet. We haven't gotten to like the web making stuff. Oh, let me take another drink. Clap, clap, clap. Thank you. He's a good reader. I like Templeton because I get to do my very bad Boston accent. I get to do the very bad Boston accent. It's the one voice I'm going to remember how to do this entire time. Other voices may come and go and change. That one I think will stay consistent. All right, let me take another drink and then we'll start chapter 7, Bad News. Ooh, scary name for the chapter. Oh god, I drank water. What wrong? Let me mute. Oh my goodness. For anyone following along in the PDF, coming in late, it is page 54 that we're on. Oh my goodness, I might have hiccups because of that coughing spree. I apologize in advance. I'm gonna cough one more time and then, oh god, I really drank that water wrong. All right, chapter 7, bad news. Wilbur liked Charlotte better every day. Wilbur liked Charlotte better and better every day. Her campaign against insects seemed sensible and useful. Hardly anyone around the farm had a good word to say for a fly. Flies spend their time pestering others. The cows hated them, the horses detested them, the sheep loathed them, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were always complaining about them and putting up screens. Wilbur admired the way Charlotte managed. He was particularly glad that she had put her victim to sleep before eating them. "It's real thoughtful of you to do that, Charlotte," he said. "Yes," she replied in her sweet musical voice. "I always give them an anesthetic so they won't feel pain. It's a little service I throw in." As the days went by, Wilbur grew and grew. He ate 3 big meals a day. He spent long hours lying on his side, half asleep, dreaming pleasant dreams. He enjoyed good health and gained a lot of weight. One afternoon, when Fern was sitting on her stool, the oldest sheep walked into the barn, stopped to pay a call on Wilbur. "Hello," she said. "Seems to me you're putting on weight." "Yeah, I guess I am," replied Wilbur. "Well, at my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining." "Just the same, I don't envy you," said the old sheep. "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you?" "No," said Wilbur. "Well, I don't like to spread bad news," said the sheep, "but they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you, that's why." "They're gonna what?" screamed Wilbur. Fern grew rigid in her stool. "Kill you, turn you into smoked bacon and ham," continued the old sheep. "Almost all young pigs get murdered by the farmer as soon as the real cold weather sets in. There's a regular conspiracy around here to kill you at Christmas time. Everyone is in on the plot. Lurvy, Suckerman, even John Arble." "Mr. Arble?" sobbed Wilbur. "Fern's father?" "Certainly. When a pig is to be butchered, everybody helps. I'm an old sheep. I see the same thing, same old business year after year. Arble arrives with his 22, shoots the— "Stop!" screamed Wilbur. "I don't want to die. Somebody save me, somebody." Fern was just about to jump up when a voice was heard. "Be quiet, Wilbur," said Charlotte, who had been listening to this awful conversation. "Well, I can't be quiet," screamed Wilbur, racing up and down. "Oh, I don't want to be killed. I don't want to die. Is it true what the old sheep says, Charlotte? Is it true they're going to kill me when the cold weather comes?" "Well," said the spider, looking thoughtfully at her web, "the old sheep has been around this barn a long time. She's seen many a spring pig come and go. If she says they plan to kill you, I'm sure it's true. It's also the dirtiest trick I've ever heard of. What people don't think of." Wilbur burst into tears. "Well, I don't want to die," he moaned. "I want to stay alive here in my comfortable manure pile with all my friends. I want to breathe the beautiful air and lie in the beautiful sun." "You're certainly making a beautiful noise," snapped the old sheep. "I don't want to die," screamed Wilbur, throwing himself to the ground. "You shall not die," said Charlotte briskly. "What, really?" cried Wilbur. "Who's gonna save me?" "I am," said Charlotte. "How?" asked Wilbur. That remains to be seen, but I am going to save you, and I want you to quiet down immediately. You're carrying on in a childish way. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics. Chapter end. Ooh, and hello, Basil. Welcome in. welcome in. Burger, you don't even eat 3 big meals, to be fair. Yeah, no, I eat like 2 meals and a snack. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's been a while since I've done like a book reading. I figured I'd read this because my brain has been D&D-pilled lately, and surprisingly enough, this is very relevant to my D&D campaign. Because it's the only book I could think of to say my character enjoys reading. My 25-year-old character said this was her favorite book and gave it to her situationship to read. Was a situationship imaginary, but yeah. So I'm now imagining like a 250-year-old vampire reading this book after a girl gave it to him saying it was her favorite and asking him to read it. Which makes it a little bit funny as I'm reading some of this, like, damn, this is embarrassing. I'm getting secondhand embarrassment from this. 250-year-old reading this, like, damn, girl's cute, she's got some issues. Oh my goodness. Does anyone know how to cook chicken? Is it like a whole chicken burger, or is it like just like breasts? If it's my advice for raw chicken, make sure to wash your hands after handling it, and don't let anything you're not properly cooking come in contact with like the cutting boards or like the knife that you use to cut it. Hee, that was such a strange answer to a question that's got a very simple answer. Anyways, if you don't want to worry too much about making sure your chicken is properly cooked and you're nervous, you don't have a knife or cutting board. All right, that's gonna make my next advice very difficult to do. Because I was gonna suggest that you cut up the chicken into thin slices. So then you can just put it in a pan with like some butter and just fry it up, because then you'll be sure that it's not going to be raw. I guess you could still put it in a pan with butter if it's like a chicken breast. It's breast? Okay. It is breast. That's what you said, Tiki. Okay, got it. You can, if you've got like seasonings, you can throw some seasonings on it. Put it in a pan with some butter on kind of like medium high. I usually cut mine up because I'm a bad cook. I'd say cook it. I mean, Google will tell you how to cook it, but just if you don't have a thermometer to check the inside, cut it down the middle before you dig in and eat, and make sure that it is not pink in the middle. You don't have seasonings or butter. I'd suggest looking online. I'm not very cooking skilled. Should have jumped for the beef. Yeah, you gotta just eat the raw chicken and understand that your hunger will never go above 2. Yeah, no seasoning, butter, knives, or cutting board. Do you have a pan? Do you have a pan? Either like a pan that you put on top of the stove or a pan to put into the stove? I've gotten very distracted from my book trying to help you with this chicken. Yeah, you did do the jump for vertical beef, but they still gave you raw chicken. You gotta become a parkour pro, and then you'll get cooked beef, and you won't have to worry about the raw chicken. Yeah, Tisha, I just read your messages. Yeah, I think Adrian is gonna be like, is Don trying to tell me something with this book? And Don just gave it to him. Like, I really like this book. It's about loneliness and making friends. Problems I absolutely don't have in my life. Thoughts about death, loneliness, trouble making friends. The shortness of life for myself and the people around me. Never heard of it. Anyway, this is my favorite book. Oh, okay. You guys can talk amongst yourself about cooking chicken. I'm going to start on chapter 8, A Talk at Home. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at the breakfast table in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. "Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings had hatched?" asked Fern. "How many?" asked Mr. Arable. "7, replied Fern. "There were 8 eggs, but one didn't hatch, and the old goose told Templeton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away." "The goose did what?" asked Mrs. Arable, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried look. "Told Templeton she didn't want the egg anymore," repeated Fern. "Who's Templeton?" asked Mrs. Arable. "He's the rat," replied Fern. "None of us like him very much." "Who's us?" asked Mr. Arable. "Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings, and Charlotte told me." "Charlotte," said Mrs. Arable. "Who's Charlotte?" "She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever." "What does she look like?" asked what does she look like? asked Mrs. Arable. "Well," said Fern thoughtfully, "she has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess." "Charlotte is a spider?" asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. "A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her." "Does he really?" asked Mrs. Arable, rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. "Oh yeah, Wilbur adores Charlotte," said Fern. "Did you know that Charlotte said when the goslings hatched?" "I haven't the faintest idea," said Mr. Arable. "Tell us." "Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, 'I am sure every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitted effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it.' Don't you think that's a pleasant thing for her to say?" "Yes, I do," said Mrs. Arable. "And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school. And tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon, you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you?" "I like it there," replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she left her room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. "I worry about Fern," she said. "Did you hear the way she rambled on about the animals, pretending that they talked?" Mr. Arable chuckled. "Maybe they do," he said. "I've wondered sometimes. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think they hear all sorts of things." "Just the same, I do worry about her," replied Mrs. Arable. "I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she's acting about that pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk." Mr. Arable grinned. "Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's," he said. And thank you, Nano, for gifting Tisha so. Thank you. Oh my goodness. The Girl and Animal Whisperer? I don't know. That is a good question. It raises the question of like if these things are actually happening to Wilbur or if it's Fern kind of like seeing her pig look a bit sad and just like making it up in her head. You know how like sometimes when you're a kid, you'll like see your dog and be like, oh my God, he's so sad because we didn't do this for him. And the dog's just living its life. It's just kind of making a sad face because it gets things when it does. That's what I think might be happening. That you never know though. I think there's irrefutable proof that it's not all in her head later, but who knows? The animals are like Stewie and only some people can understand though. It's a childlike wonder. Charlotte just knows. She knows what they're thinking. But we're about to start chapter 9. It's in Roman numerals. I have to give me yeah, I think it's chapter 9 on page 61. Wilbur's boast. A spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it's made of thin, delicate strands, the web is not easily broken. However, a web gets torn every day by the insects that kick around in it, and a spider must rebuild it when it gets full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked to sit nearby and watch. One afternoon, she heard a most interesting conversation and witnessed a strange event. Your legs are awfully hairy legs, Charlotte. Wait. Your legs are awfully hairy legs, Charlotte, said Wilbur as the spider busily worked at her task. My legs are hairy for a good reason, replied Charlotte. Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 secretions. The coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the patella, the tibia, the metatarsus, and the tarsus. Wilbur sat bolt upright. You're kidding, he said. No, I'm not either. Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time. For God's sakes. Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus, and tarsus. Goodness, said Wilbur, looking down at his own chubby legs. I don't think my legs have 7 sections. Well, said Charlotte, you and I lead very different lives. You don't have to spin a web. It takes real legwork. I could spin a web if I tried, said Wilbur, boasting. I've just never tried it. Let's see you do it, said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly, and her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. Okay, replied Wilbur. You coach me and I'll spin one. It must be a lot of fun to spin a web. How do I start? Take a deep breath, said Charlotte, smiling. Wilbur breathed deeply. Now climb to the highest place you can get, like this. Charlotte raced to the top of the doorway. Wilbur scrambled to the top of the manure pile. Very good, said Charlotte. Now make an attachment with your spinnerets, hurl yourself into space, and let out a dragline as you go down. Wilbur hesitated for a moment, and then jumped out into the air. He glanced hastily behind to see if a piece of rope was following him, to check his fall. But nothing seemed to be happening in his rear, and the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. Oh, he grunted. Charlotte laughed so hard her web began to sway. What did I do wrong? Asked the pig when he recovered from his bump. Nothing, said Charlotte. It was a nice try. I think I'll try again, said Wilbur cheerfully. I believe what I need is a little piece of string to hold me. The pig walked out into his yard. You there, Templeton? He called. The rat poked his head out from under the trough. Got a little piece of string I could borrow? Asked Wilbur. I need it to spin a web. Yeah, indeed, replied Templeton, who saved string. No trouble at all. Anything to oblige. He crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way, and returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur examined it. That's just the thing, he said. Tie one end to my tail, will you, Templeton? Wilbur crouched low, his thin, curly tail towards the rat. Templeton seized the string, passed it around the end of the pig's tail, and tied 2 half hitches. Charlotte watched in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale food attracted the flies she needed, and she was proud to see that he was not a quitter and was willing to try again to spin a web. While the rat and spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climbed again to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. "Everybody watch!" he cried, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air head first. The string trailed behind him, but as he had neglected to fasten the other end to anything, it didn't really do any good, and Wilbur landed with a thud, crashed and hurt. Tears came to his eyes. Templeton grinned. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit, she spoke. "You can't spin a web, Wilbur. I advise you to put the idea out of your mind. You lack two things needed for spinning a web." "What are they?" asked Wilbur sadly. "You lack a set of spinnerets, and you lack knowledge, the know-how. But cheer up. You don't need a web. Zuckerman supplies you with 3 big meals a day. Why should you worry about trapping food?" Wilbur sighed. "You're so much cleverer and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I was just trying to show off. Serves me right." Templeton untied his string and took it back to his home. Charlotte returned to her weaving. "You don't need to feel too badly, Wilbur," she said. "Not many creatures can spin webs. Even men aren't as good at it as spiders, although they think they're pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear about the Queensboro Bridge?" Wilbur shook his head. "Is it a web?" Sort of," replied Charlotte. "But do you know how long it took men to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening." "What do people catch in the Queensboro Bridge? Bugs?" asked Wilbur. "No," said Charlotte. "They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there's something better on the other side. If they'd hang their head down at the top of the thing and wait quietly, maybe something good would come along. But no, with men it's rush, rush, rush every minute. I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider." "What does sedentary mean?" asked Wilbur. "Means I sit still in a good part of time and don't go wandering all over my creation. I know a good thing when I see it, and my web is a good thing. I stay put and wait for what comes. Gives me a chance to think." "Well, I'm sort of sedentary myself, I guess," said the pig. "I have to hang around here whether I want to or not. You know where I'd like to really be this evening?" "Where?" "In a forest looking for beech nuts and truffles and delectable roots, pushing aside seeds with my wonderful strong nose, searching and sniffing along the ground, smelling. "You smell just the way you are." "Wait. You smell just the way you are," remarked a lamb who had just walked in. "I can smell you from here. You're the smelliest creature in this place." Wilbur hung his head. His eyes grew wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment, and she spoke sharply to the lamb. "Let Wilbur alone," she said. "He has a perfect right to smell considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you are interrupting a very pleasant conversation. What were we talking about, Wilbur, when we were so rudely interrupted?" "Oh, I don't remember," said Wilbur. "It doesn't make any difference. Let's not talk anymore for a while, Charlotte. I'm getting sleepy. You go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening." Wilbur stretched out on his side. Twilight settled over Zuckerman's barn and a feeling of peace. Fern knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows passed on silent wings, in and out on the doorways, bringing food to their young ones. From across the road a bird sang, "Whip-poor-will, whip-poor-will." Lurvy sat down under an apple tree and lit his pipe. An animal sniffed the familiar smell of strong tobacco. Wilbur heard the trill of the tree toad and the occasional slamming of the kitchen door. All these sounds made him feel comfortable and happy. For he loved life, and loved to be a part of the world on a summer evening. But as he lay there, he remembered what the old sheep had told him. The thought of death came to him, and he began to tremble with fear. "Charlotte?" he said softly. "Yes, Wilbur?" "I don't want to die." "Of course you don't." said Charlotte in a comforting voice. I just love it here in the barn, said Wilbur. I love everything about this place. Of course you do, said Charlotte. We all do. The goose appeared, followed by her several goslings. They thrust their little necks out to keep up a musical whistling like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the sound with love in his heart. Charlotte, he said. Yes, said the spider. Were you serious when you promised you would keep them from killing me? I was never more serious in my life. I'm not gonna let you die, Wilbur. How are you gonna save me? Asked Wilbur, whose curiosity was very strong on this point. Well, said Charlotte vaguely, I don't really know, but I'm working on a plan. That's wonderful, said Wilbur. How's the plan coming, Charlotte? Have you gotten very far with it? Is it coming along pretty well? Wilbur was trembling again, but Charlotte was cool and collected. Oh, it's coming all right, she said lightly. The plan is still in the early stages and hasn't completely shaped up yet, but I'm working on it. When do you work on it? Begged Wilbur. When I'm hanging head down on top of my web, that's when I do my thinking, because then all the blood is in my head. I'd only be too glad to help in any way I can. Oh, it'll work out alone, said Charlotte. I can think better if I think alone. All right, said Wilbur, but don't fail to let me know if there's anything I can do to help, no matter how slight. Well, replied Charlotte, you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep and stop worrying. Never hurry and never worry. Chew your food thoroughly and eat every last bit of it. Except you must leave enough for Templeton. Gain weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand? Yeah, I understand, said Wilbur. Go along to bed then, said Charlotte. Sleep is important. Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen and threw himself down. He closed his eyes. In another minute, he spoke. Charlotte, he said. Yes, Wilbur. May I go out to my trough and see if I left any of my supper? I think I left just a tiny bit of mashed potato. Very well, said Charlotte, but I want you in bed again without delay. Wilbur started to race out into the yard. Slowly, slowly, said Charlotte. Never hurry and never worry. Wilbur checked himself and crept slowly to his trough. He found a bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it, and walked back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a while. Charlotte? He asked in a whisper. Yes. May I get a drink of milk? I think there's a few drops of milk left in my trough. No, the trough is dry, and I want you to go to sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes and go to sleep. Wilbur shut his eyes. Fern got up from her stool and started for home, her mind full of everything she had seen and heard. Good night, Charlotte, said Wilbur. Good night, Wilbur. There was a pause. Good night, Charlotte. Good night, Wilbur. Good night. Good night. Chapter end. That was a long chapter, holy moly. Does Wilbur expect her legs shaved and hairless? Toxic masculinity, Wilbur. Nana, why were you going, oh no, this chapter? Oh my goodness. You know something I don't about that. Was it just because Wilbur gets hurt? You know, it was sad. God, so much happened in that chapter. My goodness. Alright. Let me just see. Wilbur's voice isn't very good for my throat, so I'm not sure how long I can last, but I think I can get 2 more chapters. I got the water left for 2 more chapters, I think. Let me just have a cough. And then we'll continue on. We're on chapter 10, page 72. An explosion. Day after this day, the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning in the middle of July, an idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking, said the spider, that people are very gullible. What does gullible mean? Easy to fool, said Charlotte. That's a mercy, replied Wilbur as he lay down in the shade of the fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone. She knew she didn't have much time. The morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arble wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen. Just in time for blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for pie. Take that thing out of here, said Mrs. Zuckerman. He's hot. He's hot, said Fern. He's almost dead, that frog. He's not, said Avery. He lets me scratch him between the eyes. The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're gonna get pie on you, said Fern. Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is getting all over his front. Come on, frog, cried Avery. He scooped up the frog. The frog kicked, splashing soapy water into the blueberry pie. Another crisis, groaned Fern. Let's swing in the swing, said Avery. The children ran to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft. Then, holding the rope, you stood at the edge and looked down, and were scared and dizzy. Then you straddled the knot so it acted like a seat. Then you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second, you seemed to be falling to the barn floor far below, but then, suddenly, the rope would begin to catch you, and you would sail through the barn going a mile a minute, with the wind whistling in your eyes and ears and hair. And then you would zoom up towards the sky and look up at the clouds, and the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope. Then you would drop down, down, down out of the sky and come sailing back into the barn, almost into the hayloft, and then sail out again. Not quite so far this time, and then in again, not quite so high, then out again, then in again, then out again, then in, and then you jump off and fall down and let someone else try it. Mothers for miles around worried about the Zuckerman swing. They feared some child would fall off. But no child ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put his frog in his pocket and climbed into the hayloft. The last time I swung this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow, he yelled. Take the frog out, ordered Fern. Avery straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out for the door, frog and all, and into the sky, frog and all, and then he sailed back into the barn. Your tongue is purple, screamed Fern. So is yours, cried Avery, sailing out again with the frog. I have it inside my dress. It itches, called Fern. Scratch it, yelled Avery as he sailed back. It's my turn, said Fern. Jump off. Fern's got the itch, sang Avery. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes tight, jumped. She felt the dizzy drop, then the supporting lift of the swing. When she opened her eyes, she was looking up into a blue sky and was about to fly back for the door. They took turns for an hour. When the children grew tired of swinging, they went down towards the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside of it and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog in it. The frog seemed tired after his morning in the swing. The children walked slowly up to the barn. They, too, were tired and hardly had enough energy to walk. "Let's build a tree house," suggested Avery. "I want to live in a tree with my frog." "I'm going to visit Wilbur," Fern announced. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily towards the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. Avery, noticing the spider web and coming closer, he saw Charlotte. "Hey, look at that big spider," he said. "It's tremendous." "Leave it alone," commanded Fern. "You got a frog, isn't that enough?" "That's a fine spider. I'm going to capture it," said Avery. He took the cover off his candy box, then he picked up a stick. "I'm going to knock that old spider into the box," he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeds in capturing her. "You stop it, Avery," cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed on the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and came down with a slop. The goose egg was right underneath. There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gases and smells from the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. "Good night," screamed Avery. "Good night, what a stink, let's get out of here." Fern was crying. She held her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. It had been a narrow escape. Later on that morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again, how the Arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte, and how the smell of the broken egg drove them away just in time. "It was that rotten egg that saved Charlotte's life," said Wilbur. The goose was proud of her share in the adventure. "I delighted the egg never hatched," she gabbled. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg, but he couldn't resist boasting. It pays to save things," he said in his surly voice. "A rat never knows when something's gonna come in handy. I never throw anything away." "Well," said one of the lambs, "this whole business is all and well good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? The smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that is perfumed with a rotten egg?" Don't worry, you get used to it," said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers, and then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Lurvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short a few paces of the pig pen. He sniffed the air and made a face. "What in the thunder?" he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up a stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. "Rats," he said. "Phew, I might have known a rat would make a nest under this trough. How I hate a rat." As Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat nets, burying the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions, he then picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured. The slops ran creamily down around the pig's eyes and ears. Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get everything at once. It was a delicious meal. skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, the rind of a summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of a ginger snap, a fish tail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from a noodle cup, the scum of a cup of cocoa, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of paper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared around the barn and smelled good again. The afternoon passed and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of the evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily, eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily while the other creatures drowsed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed what she was at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled a night song. Charlotte tore a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump around midnight, the spider was still at work. Ooh. Okay. I'm looking at my voice, and I think we're about halfway. We're about halfway. Oh goodness, I've lost my page. I was hoping I could get this done in 2 streams. We're a bit under halfway, but I think next time we can just lock in. Because we're on chapter 11. We'll just have to remember that. That's chapter 11. Because it's getting a bit late, and let me see how long the next chapter is. Yeah, the next chapter is a bit long, and I don't want to leave it during half of a chapter. So I think we'll leave it here and pick it back up tomorrow. Tomorrow night? Let me see what my schedule is. Give me 1 second. Do I have a stream schedule tomorrow? No, I do not. Yeah, we can do this tomorrow night. I don't think I have any plans. If I have any plans, I don't know what they are. So I think around the same time. I started at about 7. So 7 MST, 6 PST. We can hopefully finish reading this. Perchance. But I think my voice is fading a little bit for tonight. So I'm gonna leave it here. It was fun though. It's been a while since I've done a reading stream. It's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable little experience to have. I think I know who I'm reading into. Yeah, Aqua's doing more of her Soul Link, Pokemon Soul Link. So we're gonna go right into Aqua. She is playing alongside Multi, who, if you know our D&D campaign that we're a part of. If you know about that, I need to update when the next session is. Haven't done that in a while. Yeah. We're gonna be raiding into them. Aqua is also a player in the new D&D campaign that we're going to be starting next Tuesday, based on Grand Blue Fantasy. Ooh la la. She's also a player in that, so yeah. Next session, October. Oh, we locked in for October 14th. I know it was like a 50-50 on that. I'll update it now. I'll update it while the raid stuff's going through. I wasn't sure. We hadn't like fully locked in on it, but Multi told you to finish the thumbnail. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Oh, there's so much is going to happen next session. I'm biting at the chain. I have enough time. I have enough time to change this. D. Next session. October 14th. There we are. Bada bing, bada boom. I'm gonna have to update it when Kingdom Hearts starts as well. I'm gonna have to wait for schedules to calm down, and then I can just put every other Monday and then the day that Grand Blue ends up. Okay, but go show Aqua some love. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night. It's been fun hanging out, just having a read. See you when I see you next. Peace out. And then I wait for the stream delay. And anyone who doesn't have the 30-second delay just awkwardly has to sit here. I need like an ending screen, but I'm so lazy to make one. I prefer this just awkward chat between us. All right, goodbye.